Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast. We've got Ray Fittipaldo. Let's talk about the Steelers' plans in free agency because it seems like a lot of guys have been signed. And now there's questions as far as who's left to sign with all the cap space they have remaining and what's the strategy behind it. We talk about that, their new cornerback Darius Slay, and their new running back room with Kenneth Gainwell added, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers beat reporters. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as all of the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Did you know they do workers' compensation? When you've been hurt on the job, you need to know who decides when you're better. The insurance companies, doctors do, and that means sometimes you need someone to stand up for you. That group can be Edgar Snyder Associates. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR for more on them later. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers in free agency here, because you and I talked about a lot of different targets that they could have got. A cornerback, Charvarius Ward, Carlton Davis, all those names here. At defensive line, Tershawn Wharton, Milton Williams, all those guys. They're all gone. The Steelers did not get any of those guys. Now, they did trade for DK Metcalf. They have now signed Darius Slay, and we'll get to Slay in those things. We've talked about DK Metcalf on the earlier show this week. But looking around, do you think this has been a mistake by the Steelers, or do you think this was part of the plan, was they weren't going after that first crop of guys and they have something else in mind here?
I think DK Metcalf is this year's Patrick Queen times 2. So basically their big free agent move was the acquisition, the trade for DK Metcalf. If you look at it, paying $30 million a year to him, that's going to take up a significant amount of your salary cap. And the other things that we have to factor into this, Chris, number one, it's the quarterback. We don't know how much they're going to have to pay either Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Now, I think if it's Wilson, I think that's going to be a little bit cheaper than Rodgers, somewhere probably in the 20 to 25 million a year range. Rodgers, if he wants to hold him up, maybe he approaches 30, something like that. So you have to allocate money for the quarterback. On top of that, and I think we discussed this last week, the Myles Garrett signing, $40 million a year annual average on that contract, that's going to affect TJ Watt's contract this summer. Now, it's going to be a huge difference. I mean, we're talking 35 to 40. I know people are going to say it's only $5 million, but that is part of this formula as well. So when you break it down, maybe that's the reason. In an ideal scenario, they did want to get a defensive lineman, Chris. They absolutely did. That was going to come with Justin Fields making 15 or 18 million a year. That didn't happen. So I think this whole quarterback thing adversely affected everything else in free agency, and now we're seeing the fallout.
I think that's the thing here that everyone's wondering is like, did the quarterback situation hold up everything, or were they going to do this anyways because of the DK Metcalf trade and saying like, oh, you know what, the big signing has happened, so you don't need to be as aggressive with some of these other moves. Personally, Ray, I have to think like there's got to be some other thing going on here as far as this. Maybe they're waiting out because they also. I think that there's a point to wait out to make sure that you don't overpay whoever you're playing at quarterback this year, because Aaron Rodgers. We've seen the suggestions out there that he'll make 45 a year. That's ridiculous. They should never pay anything like that. But like at the same time, I wonder if the situation that Aaron Rodgers is contemplating is Giants are offering more money, Steelers are offering less money, but Giants are in a terrible spot, whereas the Steelers have at least made the playoffs 4 out of the last 5 years, and I could do something with that. And I'm 41. I don't got too many more chances at this. So I wonder if that's what he's wondering. But, at what point, Ray, do you think the Steelers have to kind of be like, you know what? We're wrapping this up. You know what? You don't, Aaron, you're not sure? Russ, get back here. We'll sign this deal and we'll make that happen.
Yeah, I think they were willing to wait, but the news on Wednesday that Russell Wilson was going to take visits to the Cleveland Browns on Thursday and then the New York Giants on Friday, I think maybe does put a deadline on this thing. If it gets to the point, hey, it may happen Thursday. The Browns might have him in their building. They might not want him to get out of the building. Maybe the phone call is placed to Omar. Hey, we got this. What's your offer? Or we're going to take this. That's a lot of times how these things work. Or that could happen on Friday when he's visiting the Giants. So we could be, because of Russell Wilson's camp, I think smartly arranging these visits. I think we could maybe see some action tomorrow or Friday. Listen, if the Steelers are not intent on bringing Wilson back, then they won't care. And we'll know that right away because they'll just let him sign somewhere else. But if they truly are looking at Russell as a fallback option and they don't know what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers, then this is something to watch here in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Ray, what sense of irony is there in the world where the Browns now have Kenny Pickett, and if they signed Russell Wilson, that Kenny Pickett once again cannot escape this man from being on his depth chart?
That's pretty good. The only thing that would top that was if the NFL schedule makers made the September whatever home opener for the Steelers against the Cleveland Browns. That would be a treat.
That would be amazing. I feel like they would need to have Hard Knocks back just for that, just for those games. It's like you don't need the whole season.
just come back for 1 week.
It's just that would be the most insane thing. Not only do you have Russell Wilson, but if Russell Wilson for whatever reason got hurt pushing a sled in Cleveland, it would be Kenny Pickett you're playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh gosh, that's crazy. All right, well let's take a step back here. One thing that I look at, and there is a trend as far as the additions the Steelers have made. DK Metcalf, trade. Darius Slay, cut. If they sign Aaron Rodgers, again, it's not finalized or anything like that, but if they signed Aaron Rodgers, he's a cut player. A lot of these players they are adding would not count against their compensatory pick formula for next season. Whereas right now, they are in line to get a lot of compensatory picks. Dan Moore signed for a huge deal with the Tennessee Titans. Najee Harris got a $9.5 million deal with the Chargers. You got Dante Jackson's contract, Justin Fields' contract. And if Russell Wilson signs somewhere else, you throw that in there too. That's a lot of players who were let go into free agency and signed somewhere else that could count towards their compensatory picks next year. And do you think that is a strategy that the Steelers are lining up right now? Or is this more just coincidence because they're trying to be non-committal on the wrong guys right now?
Well, 2 points before I get to your answer there. You forgot about James Daniels, who signed a contract.
Another one.
And the Najee Harris contract, I actually saw a correction today. Well, not a correction. It was just reported out in a different manner. He's only making, I think, $5 or $5.5 million. The incentives are going to be $9, and if he reaches all the incentives, it's going to be $9.5. So really, I mean, he's basically playing on Jaylen Warren's contract.
Yep.
And they're basically choosing Jaylen Warren over him, just for some perspective there. And I'm sorry, go back to your question because I totally lost my train of thought there.
No, you're fine. But with all those players we're talking about that have been signed somewhere else, is this a strategy by the Steelers, or do you think this is more coincidence?
Yeah, listen, it could be because we all know at some point they're going to have to get their franchise quarterback. And you know what happens when you have to trade up, Chris. You need ammunition to go do that. So, you get a bunch of – and the way this works, too, we should explain this. Like a Dan Moore $82 million contract likely is going to be in that third-round comp range, okay? Some of these other ones, like James Daniels' contract would be up there, too. So that might be a third or a fourth. So there's different rounds of comp picks depending on the contracts that are signed. But, yeah, they're accumulating draft picks. They could have as many as 10 or 11, and that just gives you the freedom. Okay, we're going to trade you hour 1 and hour 2, and then you have all these other comp picks, and then that's the ammunition that you need to go up and, to get whoever, Arch Manning, Drew Aller, if he has a great year. You name the 2026 quarterback. That could be a part of their strategy. It's not something I really thought about until the last week or so, but when you see all this stuff adding up, it does make a little bit of sense.
it does seem like part of the plan here and why they didn't go after some of these top line free agents, because if you signed like Milton Williams, he signed for a mega deal. And if you sign him, that basically wipes out the whole Dan Moore contract. So that's one third round comp pick that you probably don't get there. And then if you sign, a Tershawn Ward, the same thing happens there. You sign Charvarius Ward, that's definitely another big one. So maybe that's part of the plan. Maybe that the Omar Khan still has his eyes on next year when it comes to trying to find this quarterback, and that's the priority here above trying to reload this roster right now to make them a contender in 2025 to get higher up than just a wild card berth. But I want to talk about the other key addition that they've made, and that's their cornerback addition, Darius Slay, because I think he was a name that a lot of people look past, and I know I looked past in free agency because of his age. But the Steelers are committing significant money to him, suggesting he's going to be the starter opposite of Joey Porter Jr. I want to talk about that plan with you next here on Ray Fittipaldo here on the North Shore Drive podcast from Chris and Ray. Stick with us. We got a lot to discuss. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Did you know that they do workers' compensation? Because if you've been hurt on the job, you need to know who decides when you're better, because these are the same people that decide when your treatment's over. They also decide when your benefits are over after you're hurt. The answer might surprise you. It's actually the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? If it makes you feel not great, there's a group that can help you with your situation. That's Edgar Snyder Associates. You can call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for the workers' comp rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about Darius Slay and how he fits into the Steelers' coverage plans. When they signed him, Ray, I think you and I kind of just talked off camera, just on our own time, and we were kind of just like, okay, I guess they could sign him and he can be an option. But when we saw the details that he's getting $10 million on this 1-year deal, that is not that's not benchable money. They're putting him in there to make him the starting cornerback next to Joey Porter Jr. Do you think that's the right play, considering the younger options that are out there? I mean, even guys that are still out there like Asante Samuel and Rasul Douglas and other cornerbacks that they can sign right now.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see, because he is 34 years old. I think he's got a strong resume. Played fairly well for the Eagles last season, so it's not like he fell off a cliff when he was 33 years old. But I'm kind of like sitting back and I'm waiting to see what happens with that one. I don't think we saw the best of Patrick Peterson when Patrick Peterson came here to finish his career. And I'm just a little bit worried that we're going to have, a repeat performance, with Darius Slay. So I'm kind of just sitting back. I'm not going to make my final judgment on that. But to me, it tells me that, $10 million a year. They like Corey Trice, but Corey Trice, no matter how well he plays, unless there's an injury, he's not going to get into the starting lineup this year. So, I mean, I get it. He's been injured. You can't count on him. This is something the Steelers probably had to do. I just didn't expect them to spend $10 million in doing it.
Yeah, that's my thing. Is I didn't think that was going to be the plan here. Now, on the season last year, Darius Slay targeted. I mean, he played a lot. He was targeted quite a bit. And he was targeted 87 times, same amount as Marlon Humphrey, if you want a comparison there. The Ravens star cornerback, also same amount as Eagles rookie cornerback Quinyon Mitchell. But in those, Slay allowed 45 catches for 553 yards and allowed, I believe, 4 touchdowns here. I'm looking at on there, and he got 1 interception and a few breakups. I think Darius Slay, I mean, he's a longtime vet. He very much is like the Patrick Peterson type role. And, maybe he has a little bit more gas in the tank just because his body's not done yet. But, again, like I'm kind of just a little perplexed. I want to see what happens here for the long term for the Steelers at cornerback, because Corey Trice, if he's the long-term plan, is this just giving him one more year to tune up to prove that he can be that guy? Or is this another thing that they're just kind of creating a holding place situation so that they can, if they want to make a better investment at cornerback, they can do so next year?
This has kind of been their MO, right? They just go year to year with these corners. Last year it was Dante Jackson.
Yep.
We can go, I could probably go back 5 or 7 years, and they just kind of bring in these 1-year rentals, and they don't really even attempt to draft and develop corners anymore. I know they're doing it Joey Porter. But Joey's really, one of the few that they've drafted high that they've kind of tried to draft and develop. And I think the jury is still very much out on Joey. So, it's kind of what they've done. Really, that's the one thing. There's been a lot of changes from Kevin Colbert's regime to Omar's regime. That's the one thing that really hasn't changed. They're just kind of corners. Okay, we don't really draft them well. We don't really know how to scout them well. Let's just punt on it and have our personnel department take care of it and sign these guys to 1-year deals.
If that's the case too, I mean, it makes me wonder, how long do they kick that can down the road for? Because here's the other part of this: Joey Porter Jr. This will be his third season in the NFL. After this season, it's starting to get to crunch time to figuring out, do you want to sign him to a long-term deal? And maybe that's the issue, is that they're trying to position themselves where maybe they can, get another person to add to that equation next year. But it's something that I'm wondering about. And maybe the thing is, maybe they don't want to sign a big name cornerback right now in case they do want to sign Joey Porter Jr. long term and have too much money tied up in the cornerback position. Right. But again, these are just certain questions that I think the Steelers, while they're in limbo, when they're in this quarterback limbo, it's going to create other situations that are kind of held out there, floating out in space as the Steelers are trying to figure it out. And again, I think that when you keep stacking those up, eventually, when you have that many questions on a roster, you start to have many more problems.
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing I'm, with Slay, you mentioned he was targeted a lot, and they drafted 2 corners in Philly last year.
Yeah,
Quinyon Mitchell, you mentioned Cooper DeJean, who really came on late in the year, and I don't want to say supplanted Slay, but they kind of changed roles, right? I mean, DeJean was in there more and more. He was playing more and more, and he was getting the bulk of the playing time. So it was clear that Slay's time in Philadelphia was done. They were moving on. They got younger. They drafted well. They're developing well, and now it's time for the Steelers to do that too. So we'll see how it works out. But at least for 2025, it seems like we're in the same old pattern that we have been in with their outside corners.
He did have 16 pass breakups last season. I looked at the wrong category there when I was looking at this. He did. So, I mean, he did get his hands on the football. That's important. But again, I think it makes me question, okay, is the plan for him to just line up on the outside consistently? Are they going to add at slot cornerback? Because you and I talked about the draft class. We were talking about, well, it didn't seem like they were talking to a whole bunch of cornerbacks, but certainly there were some that they could get. If they passed up on the early rounds, they could get some of the middle rounds that could be out there. But, at this rate, you're kind of setting yourself up for it. Your cornerback room might be set unless you add a slot cornerback to replace Beanie Bishop.
Hey, listen, there was talk about Patrick Peterson moving inside. It never really happened with the Steelers. Listen, I don't think it's a great percentage of happening, but let's say they draft a corner in the first or second round. They could certainly start that guy, bump Darius Slay inside with Beanie Bishop, and, you could just roll from there. I don't think that's a strong possibility, but, we should throw that out there.
It is a possibility out there, but let's talk about another position where they added it. They got Kenneth Gainwell. I want to talk to you, Ray, about what you think that means for the running back plan, because now Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell are your running backs on the roster. Cordell Patterson, I think she still technically is as well. But I want to talk to Ray about that. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, remind you, the show is also brought to you by Savina's Kane and Galucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savina's Kane and Galucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at Moon Township Honda at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, or visit their website at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers' addition at running back, Kenneth Gainwell from the Eagles. Brings in a speedster type guy. Heck, he kind of victimized the Steelers a bit this year. If you remember that play against Dante Jackson where he made him miss in space and got a big gain. But looking at Kenneth Gainwell and what he brings to the running back room, where they've placed the restricted free agent tender on Jaylen Warren, what does this signal to you about what the Steelers' plan at running back is with Arthur Smith right now?
Yeah, well, it's just a 1-year deal, so obviously, I think we haven't seen the numbers yet, but 99% certain Gainwell will be on the roster, and they'll probably draft a running back too, and that kind of leaves Cordero Patterson as number 4. I don't really understand why he's still on the offseason roster, but I guess, Chris, they could cut him at any time and still save on that cap number. So maybe that's going to come in the coming weeks or so, or maybe even after the draft. Assuming they draft a running back, I think it is going to be a little bit crowded there. Gainwell, when you look at it, consistent production from his rookie year until this past season, back up to Saquon Barkley, really didn't get the touches that he maybe had the previous years, but really got in the end zone early in his career. I think he had 5 touchdowns as a rookie, 4 in the second year, and then just 1 this past year. But you're right, for anyone who watched that Steelers game in Philadelphia, very elusive both as a runner and as a pass receiver. If you think, I think he only had 200 and some yards this year, but if you give him more touches, I can see him, being a 500-600 yard guy, assuming Jaylen Warren takes over as a number 1, and he's probably up around 800 or 900 yards. So I think it could be a good combination, and of course, we'll have to see what they do in the draft. If they draft somebody in the 3rd, 4th round, then maybe Gainwell is a number 3. We just got to wait and see, and see what transpires here in late April.
That's where I'm at, Ray. I see this as a move as he's RB3, and then whatever rookie they draft is going to be RB2 on the depth chart this year. And that's assuming they draft one in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round this year. This is a really good running back draft, in my opinion. We talked to a lot of those running backs, and there's fast running backs, there's hard running backs, there's shifty running backs, there's zone running backs. There's all sorts of guys that project as capable starters in the NFL, or potentially very good starters in the NFL. And what I think Gainwell does is he gives you that speed and that option to be able to hit those outside zone runs a little bit better if you needed a guy like that, and also to help you on special teams as a returner. Because if Jaylen Warren's going to be your number 1 running back, you can't have him on returns anymore. You got to have him fresh when he's coming onto the field. And now Gainwell gives you the option to say, hey, he's going to be your job is going to be to catch the kicks and the punts, protect the ball, get up the field fast, use that explosiveness.
Yeah, and what's the reason Cordero Patterson is still on the roster?
That's a good question, Ray.
I mean,
good question.
Chris, they could take this until first week of September, and he could be among the final cuts. It's just they usually do this stuff much earlier. Now, to Omar's defense, he's $65 million under the cap. He doesn't need an extra $3 million at this point. So maybe he's just insurance. Maybe there's an injury in OTAs or training camp, and maybe you want him around for that reason. But terrible on kick returns last year. I thought he started off well as a running back early on, but after those injuries, he looked like he looked his age, down the stretch, and that wasn't promising.
This team is supposed to be, they talk about being a physical group, a team that's going to be getting after it and running the ball well. And last year, you talked to Arthur Smith, and he talked about how it's like the old truck that you start it up and it takes a while to start up, but once it's going, it's reliable. What's it going to take for this running game to be more than just, slow to start and reliable, but to be explosive or dangerous, or, one of the better units in the NFL, if they're not investing big things into the running back room? Because Najee Harris, first round running back, was their attempt at that years ago. But now you got Jaylen Warren, who I think is good, and if they're not getting an early splash guy, seems like that could hurt their plans of doing that.
Yeah, it comes down to the offensive line, as it always does. And listen, they're going to get Troy Fautanu back, and Mason McCormick and Zach Frazier are going to be even better in year 2. So I think those 3 expect a big jump. I think Troy, even coming off that injury and not playing as a rookie, I think he's going to be fine. So those 3 feel pretty good about it. You feel pretty good about Isaac Seumalo, even though he slowed down a little bit last year. At the very least, he'll be solid. The question mark is Broderick Jones.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. Dan Moore, for all of his warts and pass protection, Dan Moore is a pretty good run blocking left tackle. I think Broderick has it in him, but
you got to show it.
For me, it's a concern until he shows that he can do it on a consistent basis. I thought his best run blocking tape was his rookie year when he came on midseason. I don't think he's been that player since as a run blocker. So it's going to be up to the offensive line. We'll see how it plays out. Darnell Washington's going to be a big part of that. DK Metcalf's going to be a big part of it. They got the pieces. They have constructed this offense to be a good running team. Now they just have to go out and prove it. And like I said, it's on the offensive line. It's time for those guys to grow up and to finally take a step forward and to lead this offense.
Yeah, I mean, when you want to run the zone runs the way that Arthur Smith wants to run them, you need the offensive line to be able to hold guys, because part of what the zone does, or strategically, is it gives running back the chance to make decisions, to say like, hey, you're not hitting just B gap, we're aiming into that part of the line, but we're giving you the option where if you see Broderick Jones winning his gap over there, you can bounce to that. That's something that Le'Veon Bell did so well when he was in his prime with the Steelers, was they would run those zone runs, and he just pick and choose. You know what? I'm going behind Ramon Foster right now, or I'm going behind DeCastro. I'm going behind Marcus Gilbert. He had all those options. But the Steelers, again, they need to develop that O-line, to your point, to be like that team, to give that opportunity to their running backs, whether it's Gainwell and Warren and a draft pick, or Patterson, or whoever.
Yeah. And isn't it funny how year to year, last offseason, it was the year of the free agent running back. Look at all the money Josh Jacobs and all those guys make, and it just turns around this year. Najee Harris, 1-year deal, $5 million and change.
Yeah,
the Steelers make a move. Gainwell, the biggest, I should say, the longest running back contract that I've seen. I think maybe just Aaron Jones for 2 years, re-upping with the Vikings. I don't think there's been anything beyond 2 years, and that just goes to show you, Chris. I mean, the way this league values running backs, this coming draft class, and all the good players that are coming out now, it's a position that's very replaceable right now. And unfortunately for guys like Najee Harris, that's just the way the game is in 2025.
It certainly is. We'll see how it plays out for the Steelers running backs. But hey, tomorrow, or I guess today, if you're watching this on Thursday, we get to talk to some of the Steelers' new additions on the team. We'll be at the Steelers facility to do that. Keep it here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette to get all of our thoughts and reactions to what's going on there and all the things that they're saying about joining the Steelers. And if there's any movement at quarterback, we'll be all over it here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo, thanks again for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoyed, subscribe to this channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as our daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers. We're back here Friday with more on Steelers free agency here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.